The first time my daughter ever telephoned me in tears, she was only 7 years old, sobbing because a neighborhood dog had chased her bicycle into a ditch. The second time she called sobbing, she was 31, whispering from a holding cell downtown because her own husband's mother had accused her of a crime she never committed. And that night, I understood that the fiercest kind of justice rarely announces itself with shouting. My daughter, Clara, had spent her whole adult life proving that gentleness was not the same thing as weakness, quietly mentoring junior staff at the architecture firm where she worked, and never once asking for recognition in return. As her father, I had always admired her from a respectful distance, believing that the truest form of love was letting her navigate her own battles without my shadow looming over every decision she made. 3 years before that terrible phone call, Clara had married a kind, soft-spoken man named Theo, whose mother, Vivian Ashcroft, ran a boutique real estate development company that had built half the skyline of our small coastal city. Vivian offered Clara a senior design contract not long after the wedding, and at first it looked like nothing more than a mother-in-law's generosity, though I had already noticed the way Vivian's smile never quite reached her eyes when she spoke about control. Everything shattered on a rainy Thursday night, when Clara called to say she had been detained by private security, and then handed over to the police, accused of siphoning nearly $6,000 from a client escrow account tied to Vivian's newest luxury development. I remember gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles ached, because I knew with absolute certainty that my daughter had never taken a single cent that wasn't hers in her entire life. When I pressed Clara for details, she explained through broken breaths that Vivian herself had ordered the accusation forwarded straight to the district attorney's office without so much as a private conversation first. The so-called evidence rested entirely on a digital access log, showing Clara's employee credentials being used to authorize the suspicious transfer, even though Clara had been 300 miles away at an industry conference with a dozen colleagues who could vouch for every hour of her trip. I called Vivian directly, hoping desperately that reason would prevail once she heard the truth. But her voice on the other end remained maddeningly composed, almost rehearsed, as she informed me that the legal system existed precisely to sort out such misunderstandings. Just before hanging up, she added coldly that Clara should have paid closer attention to the fine print of her employment agreement, and that single sentence hollowed me out more than any scream ever could have. Fortunately, not every person inside Vivian's company was willing to look away from an obvious injustice, and a meticulous bookkeeper named Harriet, who had quietly logged every transaction for 11 years, began digging through the server records on her own time. Within days, Harriet discovered that the building's badge and login system had suffered a documented software failure the very week of the alleged theft, generating phantom entries under random employee names. And she smuggled copies of the technician's repair ticket straight to Clara's defense attorney. I forced myself to stay calm rather than storm into Vivian's glass office and demand an apology, because I remembered something Vivian had never known I possessed. Nearly 15 years earlier, when her fledgling development company had been 3 payments away from total collapse, I had anonymously arranged a rescue loan through a private holding firm bearing no trace of my name. Tucked deep within that decade-old financing agreement was a single overlooked clause stating that if the company ever caused demonstrable legal harm to an employee without a formal internal review, the lender retained the right to assume temporary oversight of company operations. I instructed my longtime attorney, a careful and unflashy man named Gerald Okafor, to verify every clause of that old agreement before we made a single move. And together we proceeded with surgical precision rather than emotion. Meanwhile, the criminal case against Clara began to crumble on its own as her conference colleagues submitted sworn statements. The technician's repair records reached the prosecutor's desk, and within 2 weeks every charge against my daughter was formally dismissed for lack of credible evidence. Only after Clara's name was fully and publicly cleared did I walk into Vivian's glass-walled office beside Gerald, laying the original financing contract gently on her polished desk, and watching her practice composure finally crack as she read the clause she had dismissed as irrelevant 15 years before. Under the binding terms she herself had signed, an independent oversight board took control of daily operations. The head of security who had rushed the accusation forward without verification was terminated, and Vivian was formally required to issue a written correction to every partner and client who had heard the false allegations. My goal from the very beginning had never been to humiliate Vivian or claim some triumphant victory over her. I only wanted to guarantee that no other young employee would ever again be sacrificed to protect someone else's pride. In the months that followed, Clara and Theo's marriage grew stronger rather than weaker. Harriet was promoted into a senior compliance role she had earned many times over, and Vivian, stripped of her old authority but not of her family, eventually sat across from Clara at a quiet dinner and offered an apology that, while it could never undo the damage, marked the beginning of something more honest between them. Looking back on everything that happened that year, I finally understood a lesson it had taken me far too long to learn. Loving someone does not always mean staying quietly on the sidelines while they suffer. And sometimes the deepest form of protection is stepping forward at exactly the right moment, armed not with anger, but with patience, preparation, and a single forgotten paragraph that had waited 15 years for its moment to matter. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.